Hi there, welcome to my weekly Parsha Shir. This week it's Parshat Terumah, and it begins the process of, and this is the first time we come across this idea, of building a sanctuary that's going to be dedicated to the worship of Hashem in one specific location. Now at this stage, nothing has been built. V'asulu mikdash v'shachanti b'soicham, God says, build me a mikdash, build me a sanctuary, and I will dwell among you. That will be built, and over the course of the next few months that we're going to see in the Parshiot in the Torah that are going to discuss it, and eventually it's going to be dedicated, it's going to be in Chanukah Tabayit, and it's going to become the central location of Jewish life. It's going to be serviced by the Kohanim, the priests, and the Leviim from the tribe of Levi. And it's going to continue all the way through Jewish history until the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash. It's going to be a brief interruption of 70 years. Well, in terms of Jewish history, 70 years is brief, between the first Beis HaMikdash and the second Beis HaMikdash. And of course, there's been this tremendous long period without a Beit HaMikdash. So for roughly 1,500 years of Jewish history, there was a Beit HaMikdash. It began with a Mishkan, a traveling sanctuary in the wilderness, and it continued in Eretz Yisrael with a slightly more permanent Mishkan that went to various different locations. For the longest period, it was in a place called Shiloh. For more than 350 years, it was in a place called Shiloh. And eventually, it was in Yerushalayim, where David HaMelech bought the Aron. He brought it to Yerushalayim. Shlomo HaMelech built the Beit HaMikdash, and it was rebuilt and remodeled a few times, the last version being the version of Herod the Great, which we've discussed on another occasion. And then it was destroyed by the Romans, and for roughly 2,000 years, we haven't had a Beit HaMikdash. But there's much to learn, not just from the existence of the Beit HaMikdash and what was done in the Beit HaMikdash, but also from the instructions to the Jewish nation as to how they should put it together. What was it that was required of them, and what was it that they did in order to build this sanctuary for the first time? So these Parshiot, while they have no practical application for us today, both in terms of the fact that we're not building a Beit HaMikdash right now, obviously b'mheira b'yameinu, but we're not instructed to do so. These are mitzvot that are relevant to the generation of the wilderness, the generation that left Egypt, that was in anticipation of going into Eretz Yisrael. Those laws are not relevant to us, and of course the laws of the Beit HaMikdash are not relevant to us because we don't have a Beit HaMikdash, and we don't have the vessels that were used inside the Beit HaMikdash. Again, b'mheira b'yameinu, we should live to see the day when we do have a Beit HaMikdash on Har HaBayit in Yerushalayim. But in the meantime, these Parshiot have many lessons for us, many ethical lessons, many spiritual lessons, many lessons that are foundational to the Jewish faith. Don't forget, this is in the very earliest time after receiving the Torah that these mitzvot were given. Yes, they were mitzvot that were relevant in practical terms only at that particular point in time, but they have an eternal impact on the Jewish faith and on the Jewish people. Let's look again at my grandfather's Sefer, Rabbi Dunner, who wrote the Sefer Mikdash Halevi. And over the past few weeks, we've been focusing on his parish on the Torah, and we're going to look at on Parshat Terumah. We're going to look at what the Mikdash Halevi has to say about two specific aspects, and if I get to it, three. I think we're only going to manage two. V'asu Aron atzei shitim amatayim v'chetzi arko v'ama v'chetzi rachbo v'ama v'chetzi komato. So the first part of the parsha, after Moshe has been given the instruction as to what it is he needs to collect from the Jewish people, what are the materials that would be needed in order to build the Mishkan, the very first item that was addressed was the Aron, the Ark of the Covenant, in which was contained the Luchot, and this was the item that is first mentioned for construction, for being fabricated in terms of putting it together with the Mishkan. V'asu Aron atzei shitim, you should make an Aron, this box of cedar wood, and it's 2.5 amos in one direction, and it's 1.5 in another width and breadth, and it's 1.5 amos deep, etc. This is the size of the box that you should create, and then you're going to cover it with gold. There's going to be a sort of gold inlay that you're going to put inside it. There's going to be an outer box of gold that's going to be outside it. There's going to be a cover that goes on top, which has 2 keruvim. There's going to be 2 bars on each side that are going to be fitted into rings on the side of the Aron so that it can be carried from one location to another, and it's going to be kept in the Kodesh Kodashim, and the holiest part of the sanctuary that we call Kodesh Kodashim, the Holy of Holies. That's the Aron HaEdut, the Ark of the Covenant. Says the Gemara in Daf Nun Hey Amud Aleph in Berachot, as follows: Omar Rab Shmuel Bar Nachmani Omar Rab Yonasan. Rab Shmuel Bar Nachmani said in the name of Rab Yonasan, Betzalel, who was it who built the Mishkan? Who was it who was the master contractor? The person who was in charge of every aspect of the Mishkan project, of the sanctuary project. It was Betzalel ben Uri ben Chur. He was the one who had to build it. Al Shem Chochmato Nikra, says the Gemara in Brachos. Do you know why he was called Betzalel? He was called Betzalel because this is actually an indicator of his great wisdom. By the way, he was much younger than Moshe Rabbeinu, but he was considered to be an extremely wise person, somebody who was not just knowledgeable and familiar with the building aspect, but he had a certain innate wisdom. Why? So eventually, once everything was put together, God told Moshe Rabbeinu, go and speak to Betzalel. He said as follows: Lech emoy lo leBetzalel aseli Mishkan Aron v'kelim. Go and make me a Mishkan and an Aron, the Ark, and the Kalim, and all the different vessels that go into the Mishkan. Okay, Holach Moshe v'hafach. Moshe Rabbeinu went, and he changed it round. You're going to ask why he changed it round. We're going to address that a little bit, but just as an indicator, obviously, for Moshe Rabbeinu, he saw that the first thing that he was instructed to instruct about was the Aron. So when he went to Betzalel, he said to Betzalel, make the Aron, make the Kalim, make the Mishkan. All right. V'amalai. So, but he said to him, Asay Aron v'Kelim u'Mishkan, make the Aron, the Kelim, and the Mishkan. Omaloi, so Betzalel responded to Moshe Rabbeinu, Min hagoi shel olam, Adam boine bayis v'achakach machnis l'soichei kelim. Let's think about it. What comes first? What do you build first? First you build the building. First you have the facility in which you can put kelim, in which you can put vessels, furniture, let's call it. And then you put the furniture inside that building. V'ata oima aseli aroin v'kelim u'mishkan. And what are you saying to me? You're saying, no, first make the furniture, and then make the Mishkan. Excuse me. Kelim shani oise, says Betzalel to Moshe Rabbeinu. These items of furniture, these vessels that I am going to make, leichon achnisam. Where am I going to keep them until the building is up? If I have to make those first, what am I going to do? Stick them in a plastic bag? What am I going to do with these kelim? Shemo kach omelecha HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Perhaps you confused it a little bit. And what, in fact, God said to you was as follows. Asay Mishkan Aron v'Kelim. You should make the Mishkan, then you should make the Aron, and then you should make the Kelim. Did you get a bit confused? If there's a slight confusion in the way you presented it to me from what you originally heard from Hashem. And by the way, he was absolutely correct, because God had told Moshe Rabbeinu to tell Betzalel to make the Mishkan, and then the Aron, and then the Kelim, and Moshe had turned it round. I'd given you a little reason as to why he might have done it, but he had confused the items on the checklist when he gave that checklist to Betzalel. Omaloi. Moshe Rabbeinu was extremely impressed. Do you know what he said to him? Shema Betzel Keil Hayisa V'Yodata. It must be that you were in the shadow of God when that instruction was given, and you heard it and you knew about it. In other words, the word Betzalel is a combination of two Hebrew words, Betzel, Kael, in the shadow of God, because Betzalel wasn't just somebody who was knowledgeable in construction. He wasn't just a great contractor who knew where to get materials and what to do with them. He was also somebody who had a divine wisdom. And that divine wisdom showed itself in that very first interaction that he had with Moshe Rabbeinu, as recorded in this Gemara in Brachos, Daf Nun Hey, Amud Aleph. So, my grandfather addresses this. It's a cute Gemara, right? It's a cute Torah Shebaal Peh that gives a bit of a backdrop, some background to the initial activities surrounding the construction of the Mishkan. Anu Moitzim, he says. So this is what the Mikdash Halevi says. Ki b'tchilo kasher HaKadosh Baruch Hu leMoshe seder meleches HaMishkan v'kelov. That at the beginning, when God instructed Moshe the order in which the Mishkan should be put together, what's the first thing that we see in Parshat Terumah? We quoted the pasuk before. Aron HaBrit. So they should make the Aron HaBrit. That's the first thing that the Torah discusses in terms of the first item on the agenda in the Torah is the Aron HaBrit. And only much later is there a discussion about the construction, how to fabricate, how to put together the actual building of the Mishkan. But of course, that's the case, as I've already mentioned. That's the order in which it appears in the Torah. But when it came to the practical application, later on, when Betzalel was given the instruction, Alidei Betzalel ben Uri, Matzinu shekoidem naaseh hamishkan atzmai v'rak la'achar mikein naaseh ha'aron. We see that in actual fact, when this Mishkan was put together, Betzalel first made the Mishkan, and only later he put together the vessels, including the Aron. And let's think about it. What exactly is the explanation for this? And this is exactly the question that the Gemara is answering here. Because it says, even though it's true to say that initially God instructed Moshe Rabbeinu to put together the Aron, to construct the Aron, and only later he discusses the construction of the building itself, of the facility that's going to house the Aron. But when it came to actually putting the project together, and they had to create a schedule as to what they're going to do first and what they're going to do last, he changed it because he was a very practical person. And as the Gemara explains, when it comes down to it, obviously you need a building to house the furniture. You can't have the furniture sitting outside while you're putting together the building. It would be no point. It would make no sense. That's what Betzalel is saying in this exchange that he has with Moshe Rabbeinu. It would make no sense to first put together the Aron, to make the Aron, and not have anywhere to put it. Borur shemin haroi lahachin koydem es hamishkan, and therefore it makes absolute sense to first put the Mishkan together. Es hamakom boy yunach ha'aron, the place in which we can place the Aron. V'rak la'achar mikein la'asos es ha'aron ha'atzmai, and only later to make the Aron itself. Ella, however, shekan mispalim onu v'toyim. Everything we've said so far makes perfect sense. The fact that the Betzalel, when it came to it, built the Mishkan first makes perfect sense. And of course it's true that the Aron instruction came first, but that he turned it round, and this seems to be something which was of divine inspiration. But there's still the question. What's the question? If it makes such sense to first put the Mishkan together and only later on to make the Aron, why in the initial instruction right here at the beginning of Parshat Terumah didn't God begin with the construction of the Mishkan? Why did he start with the construction of the fabrication of the Aron? Why in the instructions is it done in the wrong order? Surely the instruction should be build the Mishkan and then build the Aron and the other vessels. Why does it start with the Aron? Why would God have initiated the discussion of what needed to be put together by talking about the construction of the Aron, before he'd explained how that Aron was going to be kept and where it was going to be put? Zois v'oid, and we have another question, says the Mikdash Halevi. Hatzivoy al maseh Aron nema beloshon shoyneh me'asher hatzivoy al meleches she'ar klei hamishkan. The language, the Hebrew word that is used to describe the construction, the instruction to construct the Aron is different than the word that is used in all the other aspects of the construction of the vessels of the Mishkan and the Mishkan itself. In all the other vessels, in the instruction to build all the other vessels, you know what it says? It says, V'asisa, and you shall make, you shall put together. But when it comes to the Aron, it says, and they should make. So V'asisa, you should make about everything else. Let's say the menorah. Let's say the shulchan. Let's say the mizbeach. All of those items, it says V'asisa, and you shall make. But when it comes to the Aron, right here at the beginning of Parshat Terumah, do you know what it says? It says V'asu Aron Bris Hashem. That they shall make, not you shall make, they shall make. Why is there a difference between the instruction for the other vessels and the instruction on building the Aron? Hatshuvahi, and the answer is as follows. If we're going to be absolutely practical and address this from a purely technical standpoint, of course, in a practical way, the first thing that you would want to address in giving instructions for a project, you'd want to give it in order, is to construct the building, to construct the house before you talk about the furniture. And that's exactly what Bezalel did when it came to building the items, the Mishkan itself and the items that went inside it. He built that Mishkan, then he built the furniture. It was important for the Torah to mention that when you took everything together, you're looking at this project, you want to know, you understand it, and you want to appreciate each and every aspect of it. The most important part of the Mishkan, let's not talk about anything else. The center point, the pivotal point, the most crucial element of the Mishkan was the Aron HaEdus, the Ark of the Covenant. It is the most important. Hanichbad b'yoser, the most respectable, the most nichbad is the most splendid. And that's why the instruction for the Aron comes first. All right, so that's, by the way, the Dvar Torah could end here, and you'd understand it. And this is the way I explained it when we first quoted the Psukim and the Pasuk and the Gemara. That the Gemara, Moshe Rabbeinu, makes sense because the Aron came first. Therefore, he said Aron first to Bezalel. However, why would Aron come first? Aron came first because obviously the most important. Therefore, that's what must be built. But Bezalel, being practical, said, no. It may have come first. It may be very important, but we have to build the Mishkan first because otherwise we won't have anywhere to put it. So far, so good. That's the Dvar Torah. It makes perfect sense. But what we're not dealing with in this Dvar Torah is actually addressing why the Aron is the most important. And my grandfather in his Sefer brings it out in the most beautiful way. It makes so much sense, and it just addresses the point head on, and it gives such clarity as to what it is we're describing and what it is that we're talking about. I want to underscore that if we were looking at this from a purely human perspective, if we were to look at this Mishkan and the Kalim from a purely human perspective, this is a project, a human project. We're building a nice building with some nice things that go inside it. And we are, our role here is, we're totally blind here. We're not Jewish. We're nothing. We're just reading the description and understanding all the different aspects of the Mishkan and the Kalim of the Mishkan. And we have to rate now, give an order, a rating of importance. What's the most important aspect of the Mishkan? There's no question that if we're going to use purely human understanding, there's no way that we would consider the Aron, the Ark of the Covenant, to be the most important vessel of the sanctuary. It makes no sense if you look at it in ordinary terms. And he explains, if if you look at the way the world works, yeshnan shtei derachim laharich es chashivusei shel kol prat mitoich michloil shel binyan. If you want to understand the perfection of any building, there's two ways of looking at it. And this cuts across humanity. There's no difference if you come from one culture, you come from another culture. There's two ways of assessing the importance of any aspect of a construction or of some facility, or if you build a beautiful building, whatever it is, there's two ways of looking at the aspects of it, and there's two ways of rating any aspect as to the level of importance. Nitein lishkoil es chashivusei shel kol prat al pi trumosei ha'architectoris. You look at the importance of each aspect as how it contributes to the architectural value, al pi trumosei lemare hachitzoni shel habinyan, how it contributes to the external appearance of the building. Oi al pi ha'osher hachazusi, it's the perfection of its appearance, shehu ma'anik litmunas hakoileles, what it contributes to the overall picture. So this is, by the way, there's an English word for it, one English word. This is the aspect of form. How something appears, what it looks like, what your impression will be of it when you see it. There's another aspect of any building, and that is the functional aspect. There's form, and then there's function. How practical is it? What does it contribute in terms of the practical parts of the building? What element does it contribute to the building so that the building can function and that it has perfection, even if you can't see it? I'll give you an example from a house perspective. And he's going to give a couple of examples as well. But if you build a house, it can look beautiful, but if the plumbing doesn't work, it's not very good. So you could have a beautiful bathroom, but there's no plumbing in place. Or whenever you turn the tap on, there's a leak. That's no good. So it can look very nice, but there's no function there. Or you can have a completely practical looking bathroom. It's not very pretty, but the plumbing is perfect. That's a difference between form and function. So those are the two aspects by which we judge the beauty and functionality of a building, of anything that gets built. Ledugma, and he gives an example. Deles hachnisa, the doorway into a building. Teremes truma shimushis mashmusis. There's nothing more important. There's nothing more in terms of practical that you need. Otherwise, you can't get into the building. You can build a beautiful building. If it doesn't have a doorway to get in, then you're not going to be able to get into the building. Habinyan bilti shamish ba'alil. It is absolutely and completely, clearly, evidently unusable if there's no door. Lumazois. Trumasa letif'arte shel habinyan lemari achitzoni zutra lemadai. Its contribution to the appearance of the building is quite minor in terms of the way it looks. Of course, you can have a very nice front door, but overall, in terms of the outward appearance of the building, the doorway is of minor importance compared to the other aspects of the external appearance of the building. Lu'umas zois, you've got a front yard in front of your house, and you have ornamental trees that are planted in the front yards. It could be fruit trees, could be blossom trees, whatever they are. Lovely, beautiful ornamental trees. It contributes those trees contribute a tremendous amount to the external appearance, to the beauty, the way the building looks, into the first impression, that it gives to the people who visit that building. They're going to come into this beautiful front garden. They're going to see lovely trees. Perhaps there's going to be birds fluttering in those trees. It's going to give a fantastic impression in terms of the building, of the project, of the way it looks when it's finished. Ulam, trumasa mashimushis, kemat bilti murgeshes. What do they contribute in terms of the functionality of the building? Absolutely nothing. It's just, by the way, if the front yard had no trees at all and it was just covered over in concrete, it would also be perfectly functional. It would work. You could get from the street to the house. And yet the trees contribute something incredible to the way the house looks and adds something. It's hard to really define, but it adds something really important because of what it adds to the appearance of the house. In terms of function, no function whatsoever. In terms of form, great beauty. It enhances the look. Now, says my grandfather in his Sefer, let's try and understand what is the contribution of the Aron HaBrit. What is the contribution of the Ark of the Covenant to the Mishkan, to the Beis HaMikdash? If you look at either form or function, you'll discover that there were many other aspects of the Mishkan which contributed far more in both aspects than the Aron contributed to the Mishkan. Aron HaYofer, of course the Aron was beautiful, it was made of gold. It wasn't actually, it was a wooden box covered in gold, but it was certainly beautiful, but it was fairly small. In any event, he says, whoever saw it? So what if something's beautiful? Does it matter if there's something beautiful that you never see? It's absolutely reasonable to think that not one person ever saw the Aron. Why? El Kodesh HaKadoshim by Munach HaAron Nichnas Rak HaKohen HaGadol. Where was it? It was in the Kodesh Kadoshim. It was in the Holy of Holies. There was only one person who ever went into the Holy of Holies. Do you know who he was? The high priest. Do you know how often he went? V'gam zois pam achas b'shana bilvad. He only ever went once a year into the Holy of Holies. Nobody ever saw it. It was completely invisible. So it may have been very pretty, but in terms of its form, the impression that it makes on people, it made no impression whatsoever because nobody ever saw it. Even in this very rare annual visit that the Kohen Gadol made to the Kodesh Kadoshim, and you should have been able to see it at that stage. This one individual once a year going into the Kodesh Kadoshim. It's perfectly reasonable to think as well, even the Kohen Gadol didn't look at the Aron HaEdus. Sharei HaShchina, Shor Sal Gaba, because we know the Shechina was just above it. It was concentrated God that was above the Aron, and there's no question that the Kohen Gadol wouldn't have wanted to look at that, because who knows if he would have survived. Mistaber Shehu Kevesh Ponav Bekarka, he turned his face downwards, he was looking at the floor, he didn't look directly at the Aron. He covered his eyes, closed his eyes. If that's the case, even the Kohen Gadol in the Kodesh Kadoshim and Yom Kippur never saw the Aron HaBrit. So who cares how beautiful it is? It could be beautiful, couldn't be beautiful. Nobody ever saw it. From this that we can see that the contribution that Aron made in terms of the beauty of the Beis HaMikdash was literally zero. It was absolutely no contribution whatsoever. And in terms, if you compare it to the contribution of the other vessels in terms of their beauty, first of all, there were Kohanim who went into the sanctuary every day and they saw the Shulchan, they saw the Menorah, they saw the small Mizbeach. Every single day it was different Kohanim, there was different Mishmaris of Kohanim. And in terms of the Mizbeach and the external appearance of at this stage, the Mishkan, but later on the Beis HaMikdash, there were Jewish people, even people from the tribes of Israel, who were not Leviim and Kohanim, who could see it because they were standing in the Azara. They could see the Mizbeach. They could see the Beis HaMikdash. So the beauty of the Beis HaMikdash, the external beauty, that was something that could be seen. So in terms of form, the Aron had no role to play in the Beis HaMikdash and in the Mishkan. When it came to form, there were many other aspects of the Mishkan, Beis HaMikdash, that could be seen by many different people. Gam im nisyaches ledvarim me'azovis hashimushis. If you look at things from the angle of function, if you look at it from that functional angle, let's see what the Aron is doing in the Mishkan. The fact is, the Aron played no role whatsoever. It was a static object sitting in the Kodesh Kadosh, and that's all it was. Completely different from the Mizbeach, from the altar. Why? Because on the Mizbeach, in terms of functionality, there was nothing more functional than the Mizbeach, because every single day sacrifices were brought onto the Mizbeach. Or let's say the menorah inside the sanctuary, every single day, the 7 lights of the menorah were lit. The menorah was something that was used, it was functional on a daily basis. But when it comes to the Aron, the ark, it had no function whatsoever, no day-to-day use that it was used for. It was it was a box. There were things inside the box, and they remained there, and they were never moved. Just once a year on Yom Kippur, once a year, the Kohen would come, and between the 2 poles, the sticks that were on the side, the gold poles that were on the side, he would light exactly in between them, he would light some keteres on Yom Kippur. Ulam milvad zois, but besides for this, ma'uma, nothing whatsoever. Ishlei niskal ve'ishlei shtamish ba'oren b'meshech kol hashana kula. There was no interaction between any human being and any activity of the Mishkan, and later on the Beis HaMikdash and the Aron HaBrit. So there you have it. Both in terms of form and in terms of function, the contribution of the Aron was limited to 0. Shuv magim onu la'isa maskana. So we have to conclude from this, gam mibchinas shimushis, that even in the aspect of function, ha'aron ha'shimushi pochos v'lechayra choshev pochos me'asher kelim acherim, the Aron was less important than quite a number of the other vessels in terms of the Beis HaMikdash. So in terms of form, it had very little use. In terms of function, it had very little use. And therefore, to come back to what we said originally, if it was up to us to rate the importance of the Aron in terms of the Mishkan, whether in terms of its beauty or whether in terms of its function, it could be, in fact, it's very likely that it wouldn't come at the top of our list. If we had to make a list of the top 5 or top 10 aspects of the Mishkan, if we were rating it from one angle or the other, we wouldn't put Aron at number 1. We may not even put it in the top 5. And it's specifically for this reason. That it's the instructions to construct it are mentioned at the beginning of Parshat Terumah. That's exactly the reason why it's mentioned at the beginning. Even before the instruction to build the Mishkan. To tell us that it is the most important aspect of the Mishkan. It is the most crucial element of the Mishkan. It's in fact probably more important than the whole Mishkan, everything else in the Mishkan. This is the most crucial element of it. Elo. She'ato aleinu levar. But now we need to explain. Madua. Why would that be the case? Why should the Aron have been more important than, let's say, the menorah? Or let's say the Mizbeach? Or let's say the Shulchan? Or any other aspect, or the beauty of the building itself, of the Mishkan, which at this stage was covered with beautiful fur, and it was with beautiful curtains. Why would it be that the Aron is the most important part of the Mishkan? Al Shumar v'loma, be'emes miyucheses la'Aron chashivus koi gavoya. Why was the Aron rated so highly that it's the first thing that gets mentioned in Parshat Terumah with reference to building the Mishkan? Ha-hezber poshut, and the hezber is very, very simple. Omnam ha'aron lo ha'esher es mar'eu achitzoni shel Mishkan ha'beis hamikdash. Even though the Aron didn't add anything to the external appearance, the beauty of the Mishkan or the Beis Hamikdash. Omnam hu kemat loy shiras tachlis shimushis muchoshis kalishi. And even though, in real terms, it didn't contribute any real functional value to the Mishkan, to the building, or in terms of the usage that it got on a regular basis, because it wasn't used except for once a year. Ulam, nevertheless, hu heichel besoichai es hayesoidais aleim mushtatim chayenu haruchniim. You listening to this? It contained within it the foundation, the most important pillars of who we are in terms of our spiritual lives. The Aron was maybe not the most beautiful, and even if it was beautiful, nobody saw it. It wasn't the most used item in the Mishkan, and that's absolutely true. There were other aspects of the Mishkan which were more used and more regularly. However, it's the engine of who we are as faithful Jews. Do you know why? The tablets that were given to Moshe Rabbeinu, the Luchos Habris, the tablets of the covenant, they were put inside the Aron. Sefer Torahs Moshe, the original Torah that was written by Moshe Rabbeinu, that was put in the Aron. Shivrei HaLuchos HaRishonim, the broken luchos, the original luchos that were written by Hashem himself at Mamad Har Sinai and given to Moshe Rabbeinu, that he shattered when he saw the Egel, the Maaseh Egel, the golden calf. Those pieces were inside the Aron. Tzantzenes Hamon, a little piece of mon that's going to last forever, so that we should know that there was mon during the 40 years that the Jewish people resided in the wilderness. There's a piece of mon, a loaf of mon food. All of that is in the Aron. V'chol hapritim halolu, and all of these details, hinam yesoidos aleim uvuseses hanagoseinu b'chol yom v'yom. These are the foundations, these are the pillars upon which our behavior is based every single day, b'chol rega v'rega, and every single moment. Zuais hashimushiyos shel ha'aron. That was the function of the Aron. People knew we can't see it, and we'll probably never see it. Even the Kohen is never going to see it. And it's not used on a daily basis, but it's like, you have a precious treasure in the safe. You may never open the safe. You may not even know the combination, but you know it's inside that safe. And that is really it's the gold standard that underpins your currency. It is so important, it's so crucial. You don't have to see it. It doesn't have to contribute to form, and it doesn't have to contribute to function, because its function and its form is more elevated than any form and any function of any other aspect of your life. That, in fact, was the chashivus of the Aron. That was the chashivus of the aspect of it that required it to be spoken about right at the beginning of Parshat Terumah. That is why it says va'asu, and they should make, that they should be the ones who do it. It's not about you, it's about everybody understanding. Everybody has a stake in the Aron, even though they're never going to see it, they're not going to understand how beautiful it is. It's going to be made and never seen again. The Aron HaBrit is without question the engine that keeps the whole Mishkan project going. Now, when it came to telling Bezalel said, I understand it's the most important part of the Mishkan, but let's be practical. If I build it, everyone's going to see it. They're not meant to see it, and it's very holy. Where are we going to keep it? We can't cover it in a tarp. What are we going to do with it? So I have to build the Mishkan first, which is, of course, what the Gemara means when it says he is called Bezalel, because he is Betzel Kel, he's like in the shadow of Hashem. Hashem told Moshe Rabbeinu that's the way he should do it. Moshe switched it back round to building the Aron first, because he understood the chashivus, the importance of the Aron. But when Bezalel thought about doing the project, he said, listen, I'm the project manager here. I'm telling you that what you're suggesting doesn't make sense. It can't be what God actually told you to do. Even though God mentioned Aron HaBrit at the beginning of Parshat Terumah, that's not what he wanted you to do. And incidentally, my grandfather adds in the Sefer that we all know what the Aron HaBrit represents, and none of us have ever seen it. None of us have ever come into contact with it. In fact, we may know of great rabbis who we've never seen. We never met Rabbi Akiva Eger, but we know that Rabbi Akiva Eger is the engine of Jewish learning in the parish that he wrote on the Gemara. Tosfos, Rashi, Chazal, they're all our Aron HaBrit. We don't have to see them. We don't have to, by the way, have learnt through the whole of Shas. It can be sitting on a bookshelf, maybe in your home, hopefully in your home. Hopefully you've been through it, you've learnt part of it, not the whole thing. Maybe you've been through Daf Yomi, but you could have expanded on every Masechta much more. Maybe the Shas is not in your home, it's in Shul. There's a Talmud, a set of Talmud in the Shul that you daven at. That's your Aron HaBrit. Every other aspect of your Jewish life revolves around that central theme. That's who you are as a Jew. It could be that it's on the shelf, you never touch it, it doesn't contribute any aspect to the beauty of your home, it doesn't contribute any aspect to the functionality of your day-to-day life. Of course, you can learn Daf Yomi, that would be a wonderful thing, and you should. Or it could be you'll learn through one cycle and then you won't look at it again. It could be you've only learned one Masechta Be'iyun, or 5 Masechtas Be'iyun, and there's many other Masechtas in Shas. It could be that you'll have learnt the whole of Shas, but you didn't learn Rabbi Akiva Eiger. But Rabbi Akiva Eiger remains the Aron HaBrit, as do all the other great luminaries and great aspects of Jewish life that form the foundation, as he puts it in the Sefer, the Yosodos, the pillars of who we are as Jews. They are the Aron HaBrit, they are the Shivrei Luchos, they are the Tzantzenes Hamon, they are the Sefer Torah that was written by Moshe Rabbeinu. They are our precious heritage, our tradition. They are the engine that keep us the Jews that we are. That's the first piece that I saw in the Mikdash HaLevi that I wanted to share with you, and I believe that we have time for the second piece. I'm not sure yet about the third. So, as a famous Rashi on this pasuk, see in the way that they are, that I'm going to show you on the mountain. That's what it says there. It's very obscure, a little bit difficult to understand. There's ambiguity in that pasuk. What does it mean? He's going to show it to him. Rashi explains it to Chazal. Come and look at the form that I'm going to show you. Actually, God showed Moshe Rabbeinu. Magid sheniskashe Moshe b'masa menorah. It informs us, this really, the explanation here is that Moshe Rabbeinu was finding it very difficult to understand how the menorah should be made. He couldn't really get the menorah. What was going to be with the menorah? How was he going to put it together? So God showed him a menorah. It's like an image, a 3D image, a hologram in fire of the way the menorah should look. And Moshe Rabbeinu saw the menorah, saw how it looked in that hologram and that fire hologram. And afterwards, when they made the menorah, he remembered and he gave exact instructions to Bezalel as to how the menorah should be made. That is the literal understanding of this piece of Rashi that I'm sure that many of you who are watching this or listening to this are familiar with that Rashi, that the menorah, there was some confusion as to what it should look like, and Moshe Rabbeinu was shown a vision, this hologram of the menorah, so that he knew what it would look like, and then he could put it together. Rashi kan, Pirish Gam ala Posuk, and very similar to this Rashi here in Parshat Terumah, we have another Rashi on the Posuk, which is later in Kisisa. Talking about the contribution of the half a shekel that was given every year as the tax that would pay for the upkeep of the Mishkan, let's say the Korban Tomid that was brought every day. Where did the money come from to bring the daily sacrifice on behalf of the Jewish people? Everyone would give their half shekel contribution. Esrim Geira HaShekel Machzis HaShekel Truma Lashem. This shekel was given every single year. It gives here the measurement, exactly what it looks like. Uperish Rashi Zeh Yitnu. So the word Zeh is a little bit confusing. What does it mean, Zeh Yitnu? You should give this. Says Rashi, actually God showed him a machzis hashekel. Hera loy kamin matbei. I showed him some type of coin, shel eish, that was made of fire. Umishkel lo machzis hashekel, and it weighed half a shekel. So God actually showed him, again, a hologram out of fire of what a machzis hashekel looks like. And he said to him, it's a coin like this is the one that you should give. So we have here two aspects of the Mishkan, one in terms of its construction and one in terms of its upkeep, where God was, as it were, forced to demonstrate, to show Moshe Rabbeinu, to give him a vision of what it was that he needed to do, because, as it would appear initially, otherwise Moshe Rabbeinu wouldn't have known what to do. And if you really look into it, if you think about it, we need to understand this. Why specifically, deliberately, when it came to making the menorah, to fabricating the candelabra, the menorah that you put into the Mishkan, Beis HaMikdash, and the Machzis HaShekel, that suddenly Moshe Rabbeinu drew a blank, that suddenly he couldn't fathom what God was talking about. There were many other aspects of the Mishkan's construction in terms of the vessels, where the kelim, let's say the shulchan. The shulchan's quite a complicated piece of furniture. The table that they put where the showbread was placed on a weekly basis, quite a complicated piece of furniture. Even the Mizbeach is complicated. Exactly how to do it, what to do, they're quite complicated. The Aron, the kruvim that went on top of the Aron, what should they look like? Also complicated. It's not something that immediately springs to mind if you're not an expert, if you don't know anything about putting together a thing like that. If you're not a sculptor, how would you know how to make kruvim? And yet we don't see anywhere that God showed a vision, some type of hologram of the Aron HaBrit, so that Moshe Rabbeinu would know what to build. So why is it that when he came to the menorah and the Machzis HaShekel, really a coin? He didn't know what a coin looks like. He doesn't know what a Machzis HaShekel is. Why would he have struggled to put it into his mind's eye as to what it was that God wanted from him? Many other vessels that were complex and difficult to understand. If you're going to suggest that maybe the menorah was specifically complex and difficult to put together, to fabricate, come on. To make a coin is not complicated. Why do you need to show him a fiery coin, a hologram coin, in order for Moshe Rabbeinu to know what it is that he needs to do? And we can see that there is this correlation between the menorah and the coin, because both of them required a vision of fire. V'nireh loima. And it appears to me that we can say as follows: There's no question, we're talking about Moshe Rabbeinu here. We're talking about Moses. We're talking about somebody who was not just a visionary in terms of the human condition. This was a man of God. There's nothing he didn't really understand. Whatever God told him to do, he got right away. So to suggest that he didn't know how to make a menorah, that doesn't make sense. He didn't understand exactly how the Machzis HaShekel should look. And by the way, I know Machzis HaShekel. I have one in my coin collection. Machzis HaShekel that were given in the time of the Beis HaMikdash, the second Beis HaMikdash. There was actually 2 or 3 different versions of it. It was a silver coin that was minted, not actually in Eretz Yisrael. It was minted in what's today Syria, and a place called Tyre. And it was made there, and it was used throughout the Jewish kingdom, both in northern Israel and in Judea, where the Jewish people lived, and I'm assuming as well in Bovel. They would take a Machzis HaShekel from this place, and there was 3 or 4 different imprints, and over time they changed slightly. You can obtain them. They're not that expensive, a few $100s. You can obtain a Machzis HaShekel the way it looked. If you look at it, it's not a complicated coin. It looks similar to all the other coins that were around at that time. And in fact, it's hard to imagine that Machzis HaShekel at the time of Moshe Rabbeinu looked exactly like a Machzis HaShekel in the way that it appears to us to have been at the end of the period of the Second Temple, during the period of the Roman Empire. So it's not clear to me why Moshe Rabbeinu would need to have been shown the coin. And what my grandfather seems to be saying in the Sefer is that if coin is a simple thing, it's a weight and it's made from silver, why does God need to show Moshe Rabbeinu the coin? Shekein hine ha-menorah. Kushyosoi shel Moshe. It would seem that the question of Moshe, Hoisa acheres lechlutim, was completely different. So what we imagined would be the question of Moshe as to, that's the literal understanding. They didn't understand how to make the menorah, and he didn't know what a machzis hashekel looked like. It can't be that's what we're talking about. We have to say that that's not the answer. That doesn't make any sense. It must be another question that he was dealing with. He said, actually, this is addressing a much deeper issue, a deeper problem that Moshe was facing in looking at these two aspects of the construction of the Mishkan, both in terms of the menorah being put together and the machzis hashekel, which was the upkeep of the sanctuary. We know that the Torah is correlated with the menorah. The menorah is used as a hint, as something that is indicative of the Torah. And what does the oir, the light, is something that connotes spirituality. The flickering flame is something that we identify as spirituality. Omer HaKosav in the Pasuk in Mishli says, Ki ner mitzvah v'Torah oir. Ner mitzvah Torah oir. And the explanation of that pasuk is that there's an element of spirituality, ruchnius, that's indicated, that's connoted by a flame. Ume'ata. And that being the case, that the menorah is connected to Torah, and that the lights that you're lighting every day on the menorah is connected to the spirituality that emanates from the Torah and from mitzvahs, Moshe Rabbeinu had a bit of a problem with that. How is it possible you take gold? What's gold? Gold, the ultimate form of gashmius, the ultimate form of materialism is gold. To this day, I mentioned it before in another context, the gold standard. We know that gold is the most precious metal. There's other rarer metals. And there's other metals perhaps which look prettier. Somehow gold is the representation of Gashmias in the material world. How is it possible, says Moshe Rabbeinu, that you take gold, which is the ultimate form of materialism, and we use it, and we use it to fabricate an item which is in and of itself the ultimate representation of spirituality, of godliness, of faith, of Torah. The menorah was the ultimate form of Torah in the Beis HaMikdash, and it has these flames which are flickering on it, which represent Ruchnius, and you're taking the material, the most materialistic material that exists, and you're using that as a representation of Torah and of Ruchnius. How does that make sense? How is it? It's like you're taking something which has no connection with the item you want it to be, and you're trying to turn it, you're trying to be an alchemist, but reverse. You're taking gold and you're turning it into Torah. How is that possible? The same problem he had when it came to the mitzvah of giving the half shekel for the upkeep of the Mishkan. Why do we give the machzis hashekel? So that we have atonement for our souls. Moshe Rabbeinu says, what? Of course, he knew what the machzis hashekel. He knows what a coin is. You don't have to be a coin collector to know what a coin is. He'd seen coins before. He knew what a coin was. He couldn't understand her using money, silver money, and it's the most material aspect of our lives. We use it to exchange so that we can obtain goods. We sell goods, we buy goods. Using money, they can buy spirituality, they can buy atonement. I give you a machzis hashekel, and in return, I get a spiritual atonement. How is that possible? He couldn't work it out. That was the problem that Moshe Rabbeinu had, and that's what God knew, and that's what he needed to have explained to him. This was the question, this was the problem, this was the challenge that Moshe Rabbeinu had. How did God explain to him? He used the example of fire. He showed them a menorah of fire that answered the question, and he showed them a machzis hashekel of fire, and that answered that question. Because fire is like silver and it's like gold, or like money and like gold. It can lean in two directions. On the one hand, it is one of those aspects of our day-to-day existence that can cause incredible harm. It can do incredible damage. The possibility exists with fire to burn and to cause untold damage. It can cause the kind of damage that is incomparable. If something burns and burns and burns, it can be completely and utterly destroyed. We know this all from the Gemaras that we've learnt. A fire goes out, it finds dry thorns, and here in California, I'm very familiar with the types of wildfires that can exist, and they can take over hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of acres of land. They can burn and burn and burn and cause the ultimate level of destruction. There's the power that fire has, if it grabs hold of something, is almost unconquerable. You need to throw everything you have at it, and even then it can cause unbelievable damage until you manage to contain it and put it out. Ulam. However, me'idoch, on the other hand, the fact is, if we didn't have fire, we wouldn't be able to do the things that we do, let's say cooking food. You can't cook food if you don't have fire. You need it to heat up your home. If you don't have fire, how are you going to heat up your home? What are you going to use? And so it's something that's made of a sabrios, that without heating your home, you're going to suffer from the cold. You may even get very sick. Fire is what enables us to survive in very cold weather. And it lights up your way when you're going. If you didn't have fire, how would you be able to see in the dark? You say the three things for which fire is extreme. This destructive force called fire is important for three separate things. Number one, if you don't have fire, you can't have cooked food. Number two, if you don't have fire, then you're not going to be able to warm yourself up when you're cold. Number three, if you don't have fire, you're not going to be able to see in the dark. Unbelievable. This destructive force is such a force for good. So which is it? Is it good or is it bad? Just like fire, said God to Moshe Rabbeinu, Gama kesef azov, that so is silver and gold, or money and gold. Yecholim litois lishnei ktsavos, it can go in two directions. It can be one or the other. Mechad gisa, on the one hand, yecholim heim liyos gashmiyim v'chumriyim. It can be entirely materialistic, and in terms of the world, something that has absolutely nothing to do with spirituality. The fact is, it can drag you down. Gold and silver, money, wealth that you have can take you in the wrong direction. It can draw you away from spirituality. It can suck you away from where you need to be in terms of where your neshama, as a person of faith, needs to be. But from the other hand, if a person uses his money, his gold, his wealth for things which are elevating, for things which are positive, for things which are spiritual, for things which are matters of faith, they elevate you. Through this, he can elevate the most materialistic aspect that exists in this material world into an upper level, into a spiritual level. It can go so far that it can act as an atonement for you, for your soul. And it can be so holy. The gold of the menorah, the lights that are lit on the menorah, on this gold thing, this candelabra, which is the height of material luxury, it can be worthy of Hashras HaShechina. The Shekhinah, God's presence itself, can rest within it. V'onu and us, tzarichim lahafik es halekach v'lizkor es hamusar. We need to learn this lesson, and we need to take on board the ethical teaching that it contains. Oleinu lahavin, we must understand that everything that God created in this world, you can find some way of using it for spiritual purposes, for elevated purposes, to elevate your existence in this world, even the most material aspect of your existence. If you can eat food because you're a glutton, or you can use it to enhance your Shabbos table and your Yom Tov table. That's another example. Just like the menorah was made of gold and was the ultimate keli of ruchnius, just like the machtis hashekel is silver and it enabled you to be a lechaper et nafshei seichem, so too any aspect of your material life can be used in a sense for elevation. The choice, we have the freedom of choice at our fingertips, in our hands. Are we going to use those aspects of our lives, those material aspects of our lives that have been given to us? Because God gives us all these material things in life to elevate ourselves and to grow in terms of our spirituality and our ruchnius, using them as the means to do so. Not only will they sanctify us, they will be sanctified through that which we have done with them. Or there's another choice. We can use them to sink into the abyss of materialism. And then both sides will lose. Both the chomer, the actual material thing that you could have used to elevate yourself and didn't itself become elevated, and you won't become elevated. So how will we use the chomer in our lives? How will we use the materialism in our lives? Will we use it for elevation, or will we just use it to bring ourselves down and to descend into the depths of materialism that are going to destroy us? I didn't have time to get to the third piece, but I am going to post it in the PDF that I'm going to put online. It's the final page, and you can see it as a comment on the YouTube. Please subscribe if you haven't yet subscribed. It's also going to be a comment in the SoundCloud. You can use it there, or you can find it on my website on the page that you clicked on. It's there, and there you can just read it on the web page itself. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you for joining me for my Parsha Share. I look forward to seeing you next time.